Welcome to History Facts and Mysteries. If you're fascinated by medieval history, you've probably heard of the 100 Years' War. But what exactly was it? Why did it drag on for so long? Who were the key players? And how did it shape the future of Europe? Today, we're diving into the 100 Years' War, a conflict that spanned over a century, reshaped nations, and defined the course of history in ways we still feel today. This complete guide will break down everything you need to know, from the causes of the war, its major battles, to the lasting legacies left behind. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, so you won't miss out on more fascinating history facts and mysteries every week. Now, let's get started. What was the 100 Years' War? The 100 Years' War wasn't just one long battle. It was a series of conflicts between two of the most powerful kingdoms in medieval Europe, England and France. Despite the name, it didn't last exactly 100 years, but from 1337 to 1453, these two nations were at war for the most part, with intermittent peace treaties and truces. The primary issue at stake was control over territory, specifically the English-controlled French territories. But the war also involved complex political struggles, dynastic disputes, and the growing power of both monarchies. The main causes of the war. Dynastic disputes. The most significant cause was a disagreement over who should be the rightful ruler of France. When the French King Charles IV died in 1328 without a male heir, the French crown passed to his cousin, Philip VI, of the House of Valois. However, Edward III of England, who was a grandson of Philip IV of France, also claimed the French throne. This clash of dynastic claims set the stage for war. The English claimed to French land. Edward III, as a Duke of Gascony, a region in southwestern France, had obligations to the French king. But when Philip VI took over, he attempted to seize English lands in France. This conflict over territory escalated into war. Economic rivalries. Both England and France were vying for control of key trade routes. England, especially, relied on wool exports to Europe, while France wanted to secure control over regions that were economically vital to both kingdoms. The rise of nationalism. As the war progressed, the identity of both nations became stronger, with a greater sense of national pride emerging. This was a key turning point in medieval Europe, as the concept of nationalism was still in its infancy. The key phases of the war. The Edwardian phase, 1337–1360. This was the early phase of the war, when Edward III of England made the most significant territorial gains. It began with the Battle of Sluys in 1340, which secured English dominance over the English Channel and gave them control of vital trade routes. The Battle of Crecy in 1346 marked another crucial victory for the English, where the English longbowmen defeated the French knights. The Caroline phase, 1369–1389. The second phase of the war saw renewed conflict under Charles V of France, who took back much of the territory lost to England. His military successes helped reinvigorate France and shift the balance of power in their favor. The Lancastrian phase, 1415–1429. This was the most famous phase, especially because of the English victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Where King Henry V of England decisively defeated a much larger French force. This victory led to the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, which recognized Henry V as the heir to the French throne. But despite this, the tide began to turn in favor of France, especially with the rise of Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc and the turning point, 1429, Joan of Arc, a young peasant girl who claimed to have divine visions, played a pivotal role in boosting French morale. She helped lift the siege of Orléans in 1429, leading to a string of victories for France and ultimately helping Charles VII become crowned king. Joan was captured by the English and executed, but her legacy and influence on French victory were undeniable. The final phase, 1435–1453. After Joan's death, France gradually regained control of its territory. The Battle of Castillon in 1453 marked the end of the war, with the French defeating the English and reclaiming their last possession in France, Bordeaux. By this time, the English had also been worn down by internal issues, including the Wars of the Roses, which distracted them from continuing their campaigns in France. Key figures in the Hundred Years' War. Edward III of England, the King of England whose claim to the French throne set the stage for the war. He was a skilled military leader and played a major role in establishing English dominance during the early phases of the war. Philip VI of France, the French king whose rise to power triggered the war. His reign saw early French losses, but his successors were able to recover much of the lost territory. Henry V of England, one of the most famous English kings, Henry V won the decisive Battle of Agincourt and briefly controlled much of France. His death, however, weakened English claims. Charles V of France, known as Charles the Wise, his leadership during the mid-war years helped France regain much of the land lost to England. Joan of Arc, the iconic French heroine who rallied the troops and inspired the French people. Her role in lifting the siege of Orléans was pivotal in turning the tide in favor of France. Key battles and events. The Battle of Sluys, 1340. The Battle of Sluys was one of the first major battles of the Hundred Years' War and a significant victory for the English. Fought on June 24, 1340, it was a naval engagement that took place in the waters near the Flemish port of Sluys, modern-day Belgium. The English navy, led by King Edward III, faced off against the French fleet, which was commanded by the Admiral of France, Robert III of Artois. The English, under the leadership of the experienced naval commander Sir John Segrave, decisively defeated the French fleet, inflicting heavy losses on their ships and personnel. The victory gave the English complete control of the English Channel, which was essential for maintaining their supply lines, communication routes, and the ability to transport troops and reinforcements to France. The French defeat at Sluys had far-reaching consequences, as it rendered French naval capabilities ineffective for much of the war and severely hindered their ability to defend their coastlines or launch naval counterattacks. For the English, the victory at Sluys was a crucial step toward asserting their naval dominance in the conflict. The English longbowmen, who played a significant role in the battle, would continue to prove instrumental in future engagements, particularly during land battles. The Battle of Crecy, 1346. The Battle of Crecy, fought on August 26, 1346, is one of the most famous battles of the Hundred Years' War and a symbol of English military supremacy during the early stages of the conflict. Edward III of England, with his army of around 15,000 men, faced off against a much larger French force of approximately 35,000 to 40,000 troops led by Philip VI of France. The battle took place in northern France, near the village of Crecy. The English army, largely composed of archers armed with the powerful longbow, held a strong defensive position on a hill. As the French army charged, the English archers unleashed a devastating volley of arrows, which decimated the advancing French knights and infantry. The English longbowmen, who were far more effective than the French crossbowmen, proved to be a decisive force. The French cavalry, which had relied heavily on knights in shining armor, was unable to break the English lines. Despite being outnumbered, the English inflicted a crushing defeat on the French, killing many high-ranking nobles, including the king's son, Philip the Bold. The Battle of Crecy marked a turning point in medieval warfare. The use of the longbow, along with the tactical innovations of the English army, demonstrated that heavily armored knights were no longer the deciding factor in battles. The defeat had a profound effect on French morale and strategy, and it laid the foundation for English dominance in the early stages of the war. The victory also boosted Edward III's reputation, solidifying his claim to the French throne. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415. The Battle of Agincourt, fought on October 25, 1415, is perhaps the most iconic battle of the Hundred Years' War. King Henry V of England led an army of around 6,000 men into battle against a French force estimated to be between 20,000 and 30,000 strong. The French army, composed mostly of heavily armored knights and noblemen, vastly outnumbered the English, and many expected a quick and decisive French victory. However, Henry V's brilliant tactics turned the tide of the battle in favor of the English. The battle took place in a narrow, muddy field near the village of Agincourt in northern France, which severely restricted the mobility of the French cavalry. The English longbowmen, positioned on the flanks, unleashed devastating volleys of arrows, again proving the superiority of the longbow over traditional mounted knights. The French knights, weighed down by their heavy armor, were unable to advance effectively and were quickly overwhelmed by the English archers and infantry. The English victory at Agincourt was a major turning point in the war, as it restored English control over much of northern France. It also cemented Henry V's reputation as one of England's greatest kings and military commanders. The battle, however, was not just a victory in terms of territorial gains. It was also a significant moment in the evolution of military tactics. The use of the longbow, the disciplined formations, and the effective use of terrain against a numerically superior force marked a shift away from medieval chivalric warfare and foreshadowed the changes that would define modern warfare. The Siege of Orléans, 1428–1429. The Siege of Orléans, which lasted from October 1428 to May 1429, was a turning point in the Hundred Years' War and one of the most significant events in French history. The city of Orléans, located in central France, was a key strategic point and the last major stronghold held by the French in the Loire Valley. The city had been under siege by the English for several months, and its fall seemed inevitable. However, the arrival of a young peasant girl named Joan of Arc would change the course of the war. Joan, claiming to have received visions from saints instructing her to help Charles VII claim the French throne, convinced the Dauphin, the future Charles VII, to allow her to lead an army to relieve Orléans. Joan's charisma and leadership inspired the French troops, and her presence lifted the siege. After several weeks of fierce fighting, the English were forced to retreat, and the French secured a decisive victory. The lifting of the Siege of Orléans was a turning point for the French, as it marked the first major victory for France after a series of crushing defeats. It also boosted French morale and reinvigorated the French cause. Joan's involvement in the siege elevated her to a symbol of national unity and divine intervention. Her actions at Orléans helped pave the way for the coronation of Charles VII as the King of France in Reims later that year, solidifying his legitimacy and strengthening his position. The Siege of Orléans also highlighted the changing nature of warfare during the Hundred Years' War. The use of artillery, siege tactics, and the strategic importance of morale were all crucial factors in the victory. Joan's legacy, however, was not just military. She became a national heroine and a symbol of France's resilience against English occupation. The impact and legacy of the Hundred Years' War. On England, the war led to significant political and social upheaval. The financial strain of the war contributed to the rise of the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars fought over control of the English throne. It also marked the decline of feudalism, as the English monarchy gained more power and the military landscape changed with the increased use of the longbow and gunpowder weapons. On France emerged victorious, but the war left deep scars. The devastation of farmland, the loss of life, and the economic damage were immense. However, the war also gave rise to a stronger sense of French national identity. The monarchy became more centralized, and France moved towards modernity in its political and military structures. Ultimately, the Hundred Years' War was a turning point in European history, laying the foundation for the modern nation-state system. It also marked the decline of chivalric warfare, as the rise of infantry and gunpowder weaponry made the heavily armored knight obsolete. With its conclusion in 1453, the war set the stage for the Renaissance, a period of renewal in art, culture, and thought that would bring about revolutionary changes to Europe. Thank you so much for watching History Facts and Mysteries. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most defining conflicts in European history, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. We have plenty more fascinating historical insights coming your way. Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll uncover another incredible chapter from the past.